Good afternoon. My name is Chris Konetsky, and I'm the group publisher of Business Publications Corporation, which publishes Business Record and DSM Magazine. Welcome to our first event of the year, or I should say our first panel event. Hopefully you joined us out at Book of Lists last week. This is our 2023 Legislative Forecast event, which is being brought to you today by our presenting sponsor, PolicyWorks. It's our goal to help you do business better, and you all are the reason that we do what we do. I know we've got a great panel that's lined up for you today that Michael, our senior staff writer, has put together. That panel is going to help you peer a bit into the future to understand how this year's legislative season could be affecting your business. Before we get to our program today, I'm happy to introduce today's sponsor, who's helping power today's program and make this possible. Here to tell you more is Jessica Maldonado. She's the Vice President of Public Affairs at PolicyWorks. Jessica, welcome and thank you for being here. Busy time up for you, I'm sure.
Yes, well, thank you, Chris. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As Chris mentioned, my name is Jessica Maldonado, and I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs at PolicyWorks. We thank the Business Record, you and Chris and your whole team, for putting this great event on again. We're proud to be the sponsor now for the third year in a row, I believe. And I'll be brief today. I don't want to stand in the way of the great discussion coming by our panelists. But very quickly, PolicyWorks is a government affairs and public relations firm right here in central Iowa. In addition to an experienced lobby team we have up at the Capitol, PolicyWorks also has a robust public affairs team that helps raise awareness about legislative issues and helps recruit grassroots advocates to help champion the cause. With today's 24/7 news cycle, lobbying alone often doesn't cut it anymore. So for legislative success, you often need a really strategic communication strategy outside of the Capitol to help get your issue heard and recruit supporters. So our team is here and ready to help you if you ever need help with social media strategy, digital ads, media outreach, grassroots advocacy, and more. I think the Business Record team is going to drop a handout in the chat if you'd like to learn more. And we're always here and available to talk. So thank you again, and I will turn it back over to the Business Record team to get the discussion started.
Thanks so much, Jessica, and thank you again to you and PolicyWorks for helping to continue sponsor this event. This is something we started about 3 or 4 years ago based out of one of our Newsroom 515 events that we did. It kept coming up as one of our most popular ones, and we're glad that you are on board to help us continue doing this here in the virtual environment. All right, before we get to our panel, I want to talk briefly about the Business Record and its role as it relates to politics. We are an apolitical business publication. We don't cover elections or endorse candidates. You won't see endorsements in our paper. We work diligently to take a nonpartisan and balanced approach to reporting on business issues and policies that could have effect on you and our business community. That remains the goal with today's event, but of course, as we talk about legislative agendas, that's coming against a backdrop of increasing partisanship and rhetoric. We know that that's part of what's going on in the world. Our job here today is to help talk about the policy specifically, the things that these organizations are advocating for that they think are going to be helping your business, or advocating against that they think might harm your business. We're going to dive into all that today, but before we begin the panel today, you'll see that core to today's discussion will be an air of civility. This group of folks, they might disagree on certain aspects of things. We've asked them to play nice with each other today to make sure that we're getting a good discussion. We'll ask you to do the same. You have the ability in the chat to put in questions today. You have the ability to ask them questions that we'll try to respond to, but we ask, of course, that you take an air of civility to that as well. And today, this group, I'm sure they are going to have disagreements at times as well, and I'm sure they'll have that on display. All right, let's get things going today. Here's how it's going to work. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We're going to ask a few questions to get things going. And as I said, you have the opportunity today to participate as well and to put questions in the chat. On that note, if you would, please welcome our panelists in the chat. Normally, they get a big round of applause at this point. Give them a nice thank you for being here today. They're all on display here to helping us out, sharing their expertise. All right, we're here to take a look at the legislative session and help you get an idea of the issues, policy, and topics that are ultimately going to be addressed in this year's session. And we've got a great panel to help us do that. With us today is J.D. Davis. He's the Vice President of Public Policy at ABI. We've got Joe Murphy, the Executive Director of the Iowa Business Council. Robert Palmer, the General Counsel and Director of Government Affairs at the Iowa League of Cities. Brian Waller, the President of the Technology Association of Iowa. And Andrea Woodward, the Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Public Policy at the Great Illinois Partnership. In addition, we're grateful to have senior staff writer Michael Crum with us today. Michael is the former editor of the Ames Tribune. He worked for a number of years with the Associated Press. He joined our staff in the spring of 2020, and in addition to being our economic development reporter, he's going to be heading up our coverage of the legislator this session and has in past years as well. Now, normally we get that rounding of applause. So if you haven't already, please give the panelists a nice welcome in the chat. We've only got an hour. Michael, on to you to start things off.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. And as we said, feel free to express your opinions and share your thoughts, as we hope. And our goal is to really enlighten our audience on things happening at the State House that will affect their ability to do business in the months and years to come. Workforce is really going to be the big focus, it looks like, this year at the State House. And I know each of you and your organizations have prioritized workforce and different topics and issues within that as priorities for you this session. The first question I would like to start with is really, as I said, workforce is going to be the focus. What particular or specific issue within workforce are you really looking at as a priority this session? And Brian, why don't we start with you today?
Thank you, Michael, and I appreciate the Business Record for the opportunity to represent the dynamic Iowa tech industry. In regards to workforce, obviously high-skilled workforce is a need here in the state of Iowa. So for us, leaning into connectivity and digital equity. And so for us, that means making sure Iowans have, every community, every household has access to the highest speed internet in the state of Iowa, because we know people are getting skilled up and educated through that medium, but also they're doing their jobs through high speed internet. Along those lines, also, we want to support initiatives that are non-traditional educational programs that skill people up and get them into the workforce quicker than maybe a couple years or a 4-year degree. So we're really looking at that. And along those lines, part of the Federal Government Infrastructure Act has a Digital Equity Act part of that. So the state of Iowa will be receiving some grant dollars to the tune of millions of dollars to shorten that digital equity divide and try to continue that broadband expansion that the governor has done a couple years ago. And finally, you know, what we like to think is creativity is not solely for the arts. Creativity can be in business, and we also think creativity could be in legislation. And so is there a moonshot to recruit people to the state of Iowa and potentially giving them an income tax break or some sort of a tax incentive to move them here with a job or connect with an Iowa job? I think Representative Losi has done that in past sessions, but you know, let's get creative in trying to make Iowa a special place to work and have people be attracted to the state.
Andrea, let's bring you into the conversation. Is there a specific thing within workforce that you and the partnership are looking at this session?
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for the opportunity. I think a lot of us have similar priorities on our agenda. So I'll highlight childcare and housing as two that we've kept on our policy agenda. We know that access to affordable and safe childcare is incredibly important to ensure our employees of our businesses can make it to work every day. And housing is an issue impacting the entire state, rural, urban, suburban, and ensuring that when a business is either their current or their current employees or those opportunities that they seek to grow is going to require them to have housing options for everyone in their organization and within an area that ensures that they can, be close to their job. So those are two items that are not new to our organizations, new to us, new to the legislature, but we're going to continue to highlight those and elevate those as priorities in the 2023 session.
JD, let's bring you into the conversation. And actually, before we do that, Robert, are you back? Did we lose you for a minute? Okay, good.
Yeah, we've had a VPN issue. So Brian, I'm going to need you to stop by my office and fix the VPN here if we can. But this transition.
Did you two plan that today? I just want to know. So
the property tax bill did not come out yet. I just want everybody to know. That's why I had to jump back in quickly. I know you all thought it was released and I left, but apologies for that.
No worries. JD, let's bring you into this conversation quickly. Anything particular under the umbrella of workforce that you want to share with us as a priority for you and your organization this session?
Yeah, I think, first of all, Michael, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that workforce is a priority for all of our organizations, has been for many years, it will be for many years. That's just the reality of every state, but particularly in Iowa. We're seeing workforce participation that is lower than before the pandemic. There are some things that we need to figure out how to unlock to get those people back. There are things that we can do to get people exposed to our employers that we need to do, that it's work-based learning. But I think we've talked about the affordability, availability of childcare as identified deal. That's something we've passed multitude bills trying to tweak childcare. We'll continue to do that. Housing is an issue that gets workers closer to their jobs. That's important. But looking for those things that can bring people into the workforce. Even the unemployment bill that passed last year is now kind of changed the way that the state leans in on those that find themselves separated from the workforce and getting them back into the workforce more quickly, showing them the options on how to upskill themselves. Yeah, we will constantly be putting a shoulder to workforce for our membership.
And Robert, let's bring you into the conversation. Specifically, what workforce issue are you and the Iowa League of Cities looking at this year?
Well, thank you, Michael, and I appreciate being here, and apologies for the technical snafu. Cities are engaged in multiple facets of the workforce. So I think I would probably agree with everything my colleagues have said on how we need more people engaged in the workforce in Iowa. We need more people in Iowa. And so we need employers. And in some ways, those concerns are a little more acute, as some city employees are not as transferable maybe as others. So police officers, for example, firefighters, EMS. And those are the type of services cities need to be able to provide for businesses to find that a valuable environment to invest in. So on one side, we're employers. On the other side, when I talk to employers out in the community, what they tell me is that, it's destination creation. We've got to find ways to attract people to our communities and to keep them here. And so that's where cities can participate. Cities have a role themselves, but they also have a role of participating with the private sector and other groups that are interested in it, in building those communities and building those destinations. I know we've heard a million times, we've all said it, there's no mountains and there's no ocean in Iowa. So really it's the destinations that we create and the communities that we create, which can draw people and businesses here.
And Joe, let's bring you in. Priorities for you and the Business Council this year.
Thanks, Michael. And, ditto to everything that's been said already. One of the things that's new for the Iowa Business Council's perspective this year is elevating mental health across our platforms. And so for the first time in our organization's history, we've elevated mental health policy to be a top legislative priority for 2023. We look forward to working with the governor and the legislature in pursuing a number of different areas that we think will improve mental health access in our state. There's been a lot of really good progress that have occurred over the last couple of years, but two things I think we can do in particular. Number one, increase the supply of mental health professionals in this state, and then increase available funding through public funding mechanisms in this state to make sure that we're investing in mental health services. So we can adjust Medicaid reimbursement rates on the funding side. And then with respect to the suppliers, we know that this is a long-term problem, but one of the ways I think that we can address this issue would be exploring opportunities to join national and regional compacts. So passing legislation that would enable Iowa to join the Counseling Compact, for example, that would allow mental health providers in neighboring states and within that compact to practice, as long as they're licensed, of course, in their home state, to practice in the state of Iowa, whether that's through telehealth or other mechanisms. Those are two areas I think that will really improve where we need to go from a mental health standpoint. And clearly that is an issue that in fact impacts our overall workforce needs in our state. Mental health well-being is certainly a workforce well-being issue.
Let's stay with you, Joe, and expand on that part of our conversation on mental health. As you said, it's something that the Business Council has elevated to the top of its list of priorities for 2023. Can you talk a little more in depth about and to help us connect the dots about how you see mental health and the need to bring more providers to the state and keep providers here and increase those services for not only adults, but children? Can you help us connect the dots to that being a significant workforce issue here in Iowa?
Absolutely. So a lot like affordable housing and childcare, these are sort of the non-traditional business aspects that I think our organization, the Greater Des Moines Partnership, ABI, other organizations, TAI for sure, have elevated over the last several years. And I think mental health prioritization is a natural extension of that. And so, of course, as we all know, everybody on this Zoom today will be impacted by some sort of mental health incident, whether personally or within your family or in your network in some capacity. So being aware that that goes on in everyday life and being in a position to offer our employees, our family members, and everybody else in our communities the access to help that they need to get through a time. And it might not just be them themselves, it could be their children, as you mentioned, Michael. I can't think of a worst case scenario as an employee than trying to go to work and figuring something out, at trying to be productive at my job, knowing that my son or daughter is going through a very traumatic or challenging mental health episode in the background. And so I think that's a natural extension of where the business community is going, is to providing not only through benefits, mental health coordination and packages and benefits, but using our voice as an amplifier to pursue policies at a state level that will enable the whole system to be that much more efficient, that much more clear, and that much more impactful to our overall well-being.
Would anyone else like to offer a comment or thought about mental health and the role the business community can play in help advancing this year? JD, would you like to comment?
Sure. And I think, all of us will be up at the Capitol. And I think I don't have any doubt that mental health is going to be the topic of discussion this year. Clearly it will, from the state stepping in and taking over that role and relieving local governments of the tax levy to do that, and then funding it the portion that they needed to make up the difference. I think everybody's watching that to see how that delivery system works now. It's a component of a healthy workforce. So yes, I think that'll be addressed this year, as well as some of the other issues that we'll be talking about and have talked about already.
Okay, very good. Let's move ahead to childcare. There have been actions taken at the State House really over the past couple of sessions and beyond that have really been designed to try to increase the eligibility and also the availability of quality, affordable childcare here in Iowa. It's going to be a continued discussion this year. What specific measures, and let's start with Andrea, what specific measures would you like to see, or do you think lawmakers need to take this year to really take another step forward and continue to see progress in the childcare conversation?
Thanks, Michael. I would say, there's been a lot of great work done in this space already. There's been investment made. We worked with a downtown employer coalition, if you will, to apply for one of the grants, the employer or the child care business incentive grant. So there's some existing programs that are already out there. So what are we doing to not only capture what's been done and what's working well so that it can be replicated throughout the state, and more investment put into the programs we know that work, and also recognizing every part of Iowa has a different need and a different tool that is both best going to support their workforce. So I would, bring in some of my other colleagues. I know Joe has been really involved in this conversation. We're, as an organization, continue to support basically most of the creative solutions that have been put out there. But from a specificity standpoint, I think we need to look at the programs that already exist and increase the investment, while also recognizing that it's the childcare workforce that needs our support. So ensuring that we're providing some of those wraparound services for those individuals is going to be what's helpful.
And Brian, let's bring you into the childcare conversation. As Andrea said, there's a lot of good programs out there that are working, and maybe we just need more, continued investment in those. Yesterday, the governor's office announced another round of childcare business incentive grants to several programs and communities across the state. What are your ideas and thoughts about what needs to happen this year in the childcare arena?
Well, legislatively, I think I would leave that to Joe Murphy and Andrew, who eloquently can speak on this topic. But in regards to our members, if you think about the the office space of a technology company. You think of Workiva up in Ames, you think of these companies that are building out unique spaces for people that want to thrive. You know, you think about the ping pong table and you think about the beer on tap, which used to be the old technology culture, but now they're actually building childcare within their facilities. We were speaking with Casey's at their headquarters, at their technology executive team. And part of what brought some of those technology executives to Casey's and to Iowa was the fact that they have on-site childcare on site for their employees. And so I think what we're seeing is technology companies are taking it on their own, saying, we believe in building a culture, and culture now is childcare as well.
Robert, do you want to join us in the childcare conversation? What are you hearing from your perspective as far as what cities would like to see happen as far as creating those partnerships within communities to increase availability of childcare slots?
Yeah, I would start by telling you our members across the state are seeing this. We represent cities, nearly every city in the state of Iowa, and so large and small. And of course, as you can imagine, in metro areas, we have sometimes different problems than in some of the smaller communities that, quite frankly, don't have a provider. So the question comes down to what is the local government's role in assisting in solving that problem? And that can look a little bit different in every community. It can also look different from policy leaders. And I think that's part of the larger conversation that we have. If a government is going to come in and provide incentives or some other mechanism, that normally takes resources, which is revenues, and then it's really a discussion of how those are spent. So I can tell you that our members are certainly aware of the problem, and then they're coming up with all kinds of creative ideas that fit within their communities and what they're able to do locally, whether that is assisting an individual provider or whether that's doing something more at the community level as a partnership that has more of a role for the community.
Are you able to talk about what some of those creative ideas are and maybe give us a couple of examples for people who may be looking for ways that they can help make a difference?
When we think about the ability to help childcare, in some ways it looks just like another business, but maybe takes on an additional level of importance. So whether that is something that is done as you're looking at a larger economic development project with TIF, whether it's assisting a building through some type of abatement, we've seen grant programs. When we saw the American Rescue Plan dollars come down, and cities had a lot of flexibility for that, and certainly a heightened need during the pandemic when some of the costs were even more expensive than they are today. Cities participated and provided direct financial assistance. And so that can really change depending on the local conditions. We had an opportunity that some additional federal dollars came in, and so cities were able to be a bit more flexible than they are under other revenue streams.
Joe, let's bring you into the childcare conversation here for a few minutes. You and I have talked a lot about these issues over the past few years. What specifically this year in childcare do you expect to see be introduced at the Capitol, and what sort of progress do you think we'll see this year?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Let me first recognize the fact that we have come a long way with respect to childcare in this state. And I know that that's obviously a very poignant topic and difficult topic for some. The fact that that was the #1 recommendation out of the Governor's Economic Recovery Advisory Board coming out of the pandemic in 2020 is very important. The fact that literally, to Robert's and others' points, tens of millions of dollars going into programs across the state of Iowa, expanding slot opportunities all across the state is hugely important. But this is an issue that will continue to drive forward in our state in a lot of different ways. And I would expect we'll hear something about that from the governor this evening when she delivers her condition of the state address. I think for me, going back to Andrea's point, I think we really need to focus on the workforce. We've done a lot of really good things, I think, to elevate the infrastructure in our communities throughout the state. But I think we really need to tackle the workforce as well. We need to make sure that we're recruiting people into the early childhood space to do the job and do the job well. And that gets down to wages. I think the average hourly wage for a childcare worker in the state of Iowa is under $11 an hour. Clearly that needs to change. If you can go work literally anywhere else in our state and get paid, significantly more per hour. This is a real issue for us. I know that that's something that the legislature will take a look at this year. A lot of different ways you can adjust that with tax incentives or just simply boosting pay. The trick part is that there are so many, it's such a high overhead industry to get involved in, with regulations, with ratios, with the amount of space that you need. Property taxes feeds into that. There's a number of different things that we could do to take maybe the burden off of childcare providers so that they could increase those hourly wages. And I think that's really something that we're excited to explore this legislative session.
Let's talk a little bit about housing if we can. We have a long list of questions and issues here that we would like to address, but I don't want to move forward too quickly without addressing the need for workforce housing here in Iowa. JD, what do you see happening at the Capitol this year along that front?
Well, I think you've seen conversations going on ahead of session with the people that we rely on to build our our housing, the home builders, and some of the governor's office and other policymakers, talking about the costs of what are government costs that you'll find in constructing housing, and what are other materials costs, and figuring out where it is that government can figure out in some ways to get out of the way with costs so that things can get built. You're seeing some innovative things going on where you're actually printing housing, with using some very sophisticated new manufacturing techniques. You have some USDA programs that haven't been used in the state of Iowa that some of the builders are looking at now that may need an assist, but that's just emerging within the last few months, a month or so, that people have tried to look at that program that will, without any state dollars, figure out how to get more federal dollars into the housing issues. So there's going to be a broad look at housing. It is stymieing things, and it's not just it is not just the housing stock for the workers on the line in manufacturing. It's also the mid-level and the executive suite folks that, as we, especially at ABI, where we have members in 99 counties, to try to figure out that housing stock in some of our smaller communities for the full cross-section of the employees in those manufacturers.
Do you see that? Do you see those changes that are needed happening through regulatory changes or through zoning changes? What are your
I think
thoughts?
it's going to take all of that. Housing, like childcare, like even mental health that Joe is bringing up, these are not, throw me a pitch, let me hit a home run issues. These are issues we're going to have legislation every year. We've had it in the past. We're going to have it this year. We're going to have it next year. And I think I know Debbie Durham has been busy with the governor working through the Iowa Finance Authority to figure out what we've seen already. And I'm sure, just as Joe's alluded, we're going to get a paragraph or two in the governor's speech tonight. All of us will be grabbing her budget book tonight when it's over to take a look at where these programs go and how to help out. But yeah, we'll be pushing housing. Don't look for us to stop. I'll retire still working on housing. So.
Robert, let's bring you into the housing conversation. Obviously, cities play an important role in helping move that issue forward. What are you hearing from your members about what they can do or what they think needs to happen to really advance this?
Well, I'll tell you, Michael, it's an interesting subject for me. We've been in this for years. Housing is something that across the state you will hear people talk about, but the actual need that they feel exists differs. So when we talk about workforce housing, as I look at the metro area here, building homes at 300,000 isn't what the workforce housing of this area needs. That's often unaffordable, particularly as mortgages have increased. I think it's also worth looking that Iowa statistically has one of the largest home ownership percentages in various age groups. And so when you look at that, comparatively speaking to the rest of the nation, Iowa's problem doesn't look so dramatic, but we certainly need it. But it does look different. I have some communities that are quite frankly demolishing the older properties in order to kind of make room or add to neighborhoods that maybe aren't going to see the fill there. So we need to look at how we can address housing, but it needs to be done like everything with government. And you'll hear me say this throughout the session. It needs to be done carefully and with thought. So when we look at governmental entities, I am certainly open to looking at, we hear the narrative that government is the problem. That the part that we need to add into that conversation is that stormwater regulations, for example, play a significant role in all of our lives. So for those of you like me who don't live at the top of a hill, but maybe had some economic development activity occur up there, you'll be pretty glad that there was stormwater considerations taken into account by your community. we live in a state where flooding is not a distant memory in many areas. And so as we look at those things that we see adding costs from government, many of those are also things that are done to protect other residents of the community. And I use flood and stormwater as one of those because we've seen legislation in the past years. So I think a lot of what we would like for people to do is to be careful to look at the policies and to understand what may have value. And then, yeah, let's look at where we can streamline and do things better.
I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and move on to Brian. Brian, I know that the Technology Association of Iowa, they listed connectivity and cybersecurity as some of its priorities. It seems like we really almost can't go a week without hearing a news report of there being a cyber attack somewhere that's affecting someone's business. Can you talk about the importance of those topics to the business community and what you hope to see happen this year at the legislature?
Absolutely. I'll frame 3 bills for you. But for us, as we think about what's the biggest impact that negatively that could impact Iowa's business community, it is cybersecurity threats. As we sit here today, the largest public school system students in the state of Iowa are not going to class today, not because of a snowstorm, not because of COVID, because of a cybersecurity breach. So that's a school district. Imagine your company and the impact that could have on your community, your employees. That's why we really need to be leaning in on cybersecurity. And so I'll briefly mention 3 bills. A couple that we brought up last session. One is the Consumer Data Privacy Bill, and that's House File 2506. Other states are kind of going at it. The federal government seems to not have an appetite to do some data privacy regulations federally. And so states are going at it alone. And so what that bill basically means for us is when a company owns your data, you have the right to ask, what data do you have of mine and what are you doing with that data? And so you're going to see that proposed because we believe consumers have right to their data. If you think about ransomware, which could possibly be the fact of the Des Moines public school system, though I don't know, is when somebody holds a gun to your head and says, we have this data, give us X amount of dollars. So think about a school district. They have to deal with all these headaches of educating students, getting them software and hardware, and now they got to talk about cybersecurity. And so I believe there is a role for government to educate companies, businesses, and have dollars set aside for this sort of moment. We talk about computer science and K-12 education, but we woke up this morning talking about cybersecurity and how that impacts folks. And so that's, to us, is a big deal. And the final bill I'll talk about is the Affirmative Defense Bill. We would like some legislation that says to a company, look, if you followed these guidelines and you were breached and data was hacked from you, you are protected by the law because you followed these guidelines. And so these are just 3 bills that you're seeing, but every session you're going to see cybersecurity, much like workforce, over and over become top of mind. And again, I'll just reference today we're sitting and students are sitting home because of a cybersecurity breach.
Let's move on to property tax reform. And I'm going to tee up a pre-event conversation we had in just earlier. Property taxes, we've been hearing for several weeks that that's going to be a focus of lawmakers at the State House. And people are viewing property tax reform through various lenses, I think. Joe, let's bring you in to begin this conversation on property tax reform and how you see it as being an important tool in attracting and retaining workforce here in Iowa.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think it's a hugely important issue, and again, the state has taken on some great victories over the last year, 12 months in particular, with respect to income tax reform, both on the individual side and the corporate side. But in order to be as competitive as possible, I think Iowa's tax system needs to take a holistic view of things, and property taxes is certainly in that area. So when you think about property taxes in this state right now, I think we ranked 40th out of 50 states, 10th from the bottom on our competitiveness. And that's a problem. You know, talking to our members, the largest employers in the state of Iowa, as they're recruiting in new people from outside of the state, you know, yeah, we have really great public schools. We have very safe communities, but they get a little bit of sticker shock when they're trying to find housing. And some of that is within that property tax system. And so I think, you know, the legislature needs to address this, needs to look at this. I think we need to be competitive in all aspects of our tax system, not just be really good on the individual side and the corporate side, and then sort of let the property tax thing sort of wrestle from out of our control. I think that's really important and prudent to do. But to steal Robert's line, I think the state government needs to do this in a thoughtful and predictable way. You know, there's so many different tentacles tied within the property tax system in our state, whether you're funding, you know, local police or EMS or K-12 schools. Legislature needs to be thoughtful in this. And I think the group assembled today wants to be a positive force for good in that debate and make sure that we end up in a spot that's equitable and makes a lot of sense for as many people as possible, while still putting us on a path towards competitiveness nationally.
Robert, let's bring you into the conversation on property tax reform. You've been monitoring a possible bill that's could be introduced while we speak or here shortly. What are your thoughts on property tax reform and what needs to be done? And when we say it has to be done in a thoughtful way, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So, you know, I would start with saying that I represent governmental entities. Cities are government. When I think about it, I'm kind of a believer in that, of the people, for the people, by the people. So looking at tax policy, which is one of the most impactful ways that government impacts people and businesses, is always valuable to do. So there's no reason not to take a look at things and see how we can do it better. Joe said it perfectly with holistic, but maybe I frame that not different, but a little bit more narrowly. When we look at holistically the state picture, that can be very valuable. But when we look at property taxes, I'd like for you to take a step away from the state, because those are their revenue sources that they control and the expenses they pay. And think about the expense holistically of cities, right? So instead of starting a place of saying, hey, let's just go cut property taxes, look at a city budget. Understand that right now, legislatively, we are property tax heavy. That's the way that the Iowa legislature has created it. You've got various things like the rollbacks, which influence how much a levy rate impacts. Just 4 years ago, we got rid of $152 million in property tax relief. And at that time, we were saying that these dollars that were coming from the state to offset property taxes, if you pull those out, that's going to end up being property tax dollars, which is what they had passed that originally to undo. Just last year, we had the conversion of the business property tax credit to where it will become on local government budgets after a certain period of time, if it's not fully funded, which we've seen concerns with in the past. So as we look at it, we need to look at how cities fund the services they provide. And that's the question that we should be talking about. As I look at my colleagues in other states that are often used as examples, you talk about Kansas, Utah, other states, sales taxes. They do not have significantly different expense pies that we do. It comes down to other revenue sources. So as we look at property taxes, I think it's important to look at those of one stream of funding towards local government services in this state. And the conversation shouldn't be, let's just slash one. To Joe's point, it should be very thoughtful. How do we want to fund those services? Because, you know, Joe mentioned safe communities. We want to keep that. So that's the balance. As we shift a funding mechanism, we've got to keep the level of services that businesses want to be provided, whether that's water, wastewater, infrastructure, whether it's participating in childcare, whether it's public safety, or adding EMS to the community. It has to be done in a thoughtful and balanced approach. So that's what we mean is look at the pie of expenses and the pie of revenues, and let's talk thoughtfully. How do we want to do that in the future?
I'd like to keep on the property tax conversation, but tie it into the housing discussion. JD, can you talk a little bit about how property tax reform can be part of creating housing that's affordable for Iowa's workforce?
I will, but I didn't get my chance at the last way we were going at the topic. And I just want to say, as a representative here of business owners, property taxes are a business cost, and we'd like to know what our costs are. Income taxes are business costs, and we'd like to know what our costs are. Our businesses can tell you what our income taxes are going to be in the next year. Our businesses cannot tell you what our property taxes are going to be in the next year. Some certainty in the way that we reform things is something that's going to go a long way, because as Joe noted that, you know, we're 40th out of 50. We need to figure out how to work on that ranking. But for those companies that are here now, if they want to hire, they want to know they don't need to reserve money for property taxes. So it's one of those issues that we have to take on as a business cost. And so we'll be trying to help people understand it from that perspective, from the ABI when we're involved. Again, we're talking about housing. For businesses, it's a cost of doing businesses. For the people that work for you, it's a cost of living. So together they're the same when the levy is announced. But it's really what else those employees in your care can afford to do after they've done the property taxes. So it'll always be something we work on there. I'm looking forward to the debate for as long as it takes, because I think this is a generational opportunity after taking care of income taxes to dive as deep as we have to go for everybody to understand what we're asking the legislature to vote on, so that we get it right. We didn't develop, I did a project when I was working in state government where I was asked to put together a chart of taxing authorities, and my boss told me to stop when I told him I was up to 500 taxing authorities in the state of Iowa. We really do need to go top to bottom to figure out who should have levying authority, how is it managed so that we're getting the best product. I say that without even trying to get into the argument about what services should be provided or not. I think it is a funding of government issue that we need to take a look at.
Robert, did you have something you would like to follow up with?
Well, so I think the thoughtfulness is there. This is where we get into the property tax system. It's going to take a ton of education as we go through. I would opine that the property tax system is the most transparent tax system, and that's coming from personally, but also we have a small business in my family, and we don't know what we will pay in income taxes. That's dependent on a lot of factors and a lot of decisions we can make along the way. But we do know what our assessment is, and property taxes don't just come out as a surprise. They're in an 18-month approximately arrears. There are challenge processes. There's a lot of things that kind of go into that. And you can hop online right now in county assessors and see what people's property taxes are, what they've been. So one of the things when we see property taxes that makes them so ripe for legislative discussions is because they are so identifiable. It has a formula. And I will agree with JD on one thing. There's some aspects of property tax which aren't as predictable, and we really want predictability from the state legislature. In my time in 2013, the year before I started with the league, we had the backfill, the commercial and industrial property tax backfill. A few years later, we started seeing that backfill go away, which shifts things to public governments. Then we had the 2018 property tax bill, which had these same narratives, separated the levy from the valuations. And then we're a few years later. And so as we have these conversations, understanding that process, we think is really, really important, because nobody wants to hide anything. We want as much transparency as possible. But I think oftentimes we look at the number of meetings and the public notices that are provided. It's really difficult for the public to stay up to speed on all of the things, to JD's point, that all of the different levels of government are doing. But we do feel pretty comfortable that property taxes, if you go looking for it, and for the people that receive their letters and their assessments, it's right there in front of you in most cases.
Andrea or Brian, would you like to offer a thought or two on the property tax discussion?
I'll just jump in and offer the partnerships perspective. You've heard from each of our organizations that represent a different type of entities, if you will. And we represent the business community, but we have also many of our property tax levying authorities within our organization. We work with DART, we work with our cities, we work with our counties, and to the points that have been made about how many taxing entities there are when it comes to property taxes, not saying that as a negative, simply saying we'll be really trying to thread that needle. It has to be a very thoughtful approach, as has been said, and just because it's maybe not something that we're going to spend a ton of time talking about externally, we're having a lot of conversations, hearing from all of those members and organizations, and contributing into the conversation as much as we can. So I share that on behalf of the partnership and our members, that we do continue to engage in these conversations regardless of whether it's something that we have at the top of our priority list, because there's a lot of stakeholders who will be impacted by whatever decisions are made.
All right, very good. Well, I appreciate your thoughts. As we knew, this hour would fly by, so we don't have a whole lot of time left. But what sort of things? And Joe, let's come back to you for a little while. what sort of things are you expecting to come up this session that we should be paying attention to?
Well, obviously property taxes, as we've just had a big conversation on that, you know, and I think so. That's one area. I think another area that we're looking at is regulatory reform, and I'll let JD speak to this. He's been following it much more closely, and ABI has been following it more closely than we have. But state government has undergone a massive review on workforce development and other areas. So I'd be interested to see what sort of regulatory policies are put forward as Iowa continues to move forward in a way that gets us more competitive, not only from a tax standpoint, but from an efficiency standpoint on the product of government as well.
JD, Joe teed you up. Let's talk about
Okay, well, that's
regulatory
fine, and
reform.
I
What do you
appreciate that. And
expect?
we do, you know, I mentioned earlier that workforce is a perennial priority for ABI. Also, regulatory reform is, and the cost of interacting with government. And I think tonight, when the governor speaks, you are going to hear about a enterprise-wide government reorganization that she's going to be proposing, with a lot of departments proposed to look a whole lot different than they do today. And that's a good thing. I think the last review and reorganization was done in 1986. And so we've seen some combining of departments under the control of, you know, for example, I'm thinking easily of Debbie Durham having Economic Development Authority and IFA underneath her. You're going to see quite a bit of different reorganization. That's going to be our moment, I think, to really intercede and say, okay, this is how that will affect the interaction between the business community and these departments, the business community and the regulations that are coming from those departments. So there's going to be great opportunity this year for that. I would say, as we're going around saying, what else do we see coming? The other priority that I have not mentioned for ABI is we're going to be involved in the tort reform debate, making sure that we drive litigation costs out of doing businesses in Iowa, make us look like more like other states that we compete with. So that's another one that I see coming.
Brian, let's bring you into the conversation. What things are you seeing coming around the pike?
Not to be redundant, but, you know, continued connectivity and broadband expansion across the state of Iowa. That's a never-ending project to connect every acre. Obviously, cybersecurity. The three I mentioned were the bills that we know are upcoming. The world changes so quickly. I would keep your eye on data privacy and cybersecurity. But also, I mentioned at the top, there is a $2 trillion federal infrastructure bill, and there's a carve out there for states about digital equity expansion of making people have access to the digital economy. And so I think that's something we're keenly aware of what that money does. But also, JD kind of mentioned state government might look a little different this year. And so we met recently with the OCIO office and with Director Durham. And so digital government seems to be a theme here. And so to see how this state of Iowa government moves into the future in a digital realm and protecting the data of the citizens of Iowa, I think it's going to be a big deal, and the seeds will be sown this session.
Andrea?
I would add, you know, keeping an eye on divisive concepts legislation is something that we've continued to talk about. It's something, you know, social issues that impact the attraction and retention of people in business is always a reality of every legislative session. And while I think most of the time the legislature ultimately takes a really thoughtful approach to what we see in the end, we need to not only speak out when it makes sense, and many of our organizations have done that and will continue to do that, but also we will be focusing on elevating civility and bipartisanship. What's good for Iowans. Shameless plug, we're helping host the legislative slow pitch softball game in June. It was started by a group of legislators last year, and we're excited to take the opportunity to show that there are so many pieces of legislation that pass unanimously and really try to elevate civility throughout the legislative session and beyond. So those would be two I would add to the mix.
Let's just spend a second, if we can, talking about civility. We hear a lot from those who run for public office that you can't check what happened during the campaigns at the State House door, and that unfortunately some of what's said and advertised during the campaigns does carry over into the session, and it creates an environment to make it you know, it creates a less than civil environment at times at the State House. What can the business community do to better foster that in its relationships and its communications with lawmakers? Robert, do you want to talk about civility? It's something that I know that you've worked a lot on in the past, few months.
Well, thank you, Michael. And I don't know that I'm the expert to say what the business community could do, but I think if I look at all of us, business, city, community, it's demanded. We have to stand up and say, maybe I'm a dreamer, right? But what we're doing at the level of government, whether it's city, county, state, it's impacting people's lives. And so we owe it to them. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to, the dignity of this structure to behave in a way that allows us to have those conversations, to dig in deeper on issues, and to try and find that commonality, because that's what we need to move forward for everybody. And it's not going to be agreement every time, but if we shut down the wall, we put up the wall, shut down the other voices, then we won't get that input and we won't have as good of a product coming out of it. So it's something we're interested in at the local government level, because we don't want local government policies and things that they're doing to address the needs of their community to start being influenced by the local fights. We want them to be able to have that discourse and communication. So I think it's important for us all to demand that.
Very good. Chris, do we have time for a couple more quick comments?
Yeah, go ahead for just one or two more quick comments and we'll go to a final question.
Okay. Brian, I'd like to bring you in early on, and maybe in your introductory statements, you talked about workforce training. And when we talk about education, workforce training is a large component of that. Can you talk about what you would like to see happen, or what you might see, or what we could expect to see happen along that front during the upcoming session?
Sure. I think when we think about education and upskilling people, we think of the traditional routes of community colleges or universities. And so what we're seeing is organizations and programs popping up saying, we're going to skill up somebody that has no college degree, and I'm going to give them 6 to 12 months of high skilled training, and then you can hire them in 1 year. I'll give you one example. It is a gentleman by the name of Link Kroger, and he started a company called Night Moves. NIGHT Moves, not the Bob Seger song. But he's going into underserved populations of the state of Iowa. And so he's going into Native American reservations and saying, look, I know you want to keep your heritage on the reservation, but let me upskill you with computer science education and finding them a job in the state of Iowa. He's doing that in low to moderate income areas. And so for us, finding a pathway for government funds to go to non-traditional routes, because quite frankly, he's upskilling those individuals and they're getting quicker into the technology world. And so for us, that non-traditional path is something we need to keep an eye on.
All right, very good. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right, well, we are just about out of time, but we're going to give each of the panelists a chance to give kind of a closing thought and final takeaway for you today. Before they do that, and while they think about their response, just a couple of things we want to make sure you're aware of that we have coming up that you might enjoy. On Tuesday, January 24th, our economic forecast event will be on out at the Sheraton West Des Moines. That's a lunch event. We'd love to see you out there. Tickets are going fast for that. There's only a few spots left. If you haven't had a chance to get your ticket, you can use businessrecord.com/events. Also, we will on Friday, we'll be opening up our first Power Breakfast of the year. We do have a new location this year. We're going to be out the Des Moines Heritage Center in the East Village. We're going to be talking, coincidentally enough here, about creative ways to find workforce. That's going to be the topic of that. Of course, everybody is navigating a tight labor market, and companies are getting creative. We're going to have some examples. We're going to have some ideas of ways that you and your business can be finding workforce. If you have any feedback for us, please feel free to reach out our way. We're always working to continue to make these events better, to improve our coverage. If you have story ideas, please feel free to reach out to Michael directly. You can also reach out to our editor, Emily Barsky. This event, while you were here today, we appreciate you being here. Michael's going to be reporting off of it. He's going to be using this for string for future stories. So you'll see the coverage of today's event within our products. And of course, we would love to have you participate as a member of the Business Record. You can sign up at businessrecord.com/membership. All right, I want to give everybody a chance to give kind of a closing thought here today. Why don't we go ahead and start with JD?
Well, thank you. And I think what I would want to leave everybody with is that we've highlighted many of the issues that face businesses in Iowa, and particularly childcare and housing. And I think as we leave today, we have to understand that we've come quite a way on that. Literally hundreds of millions of dollars in both areas have been spent to improve that lot here in Iowa. We need to keep our shoulder to the wheel. We'll be doing that, making sure that workforce gets the attention it needs. But we are on a continuum where we are making that better. And we need to just keep that going forward.
All right, Joe.
Well, thanks to Chris and Michael and the whole Business Record team for the invitation to be here today. I would just mention, maybe something that we've not talked about today, but I think that's the importance of state investment in our public university system. I'm a product of Iowa's Regent universities, and I think as we look at long-term economic development in the state, the Regents universities, the public universities of this state, are an absolute juggernaut when it comes to not only educating our future workforce, but spitting out research and development through their faculty members. And so I think when you look at the proposals that they have this year, money going towards nursing, agricultural programs, engineering programs, and teachers, I think those are perfectly aligned with where the state needs to go, and we should all be supporting their legislative endeavors as well.
Thanks, Joe. Andrea?
Thank you to the Business Record, to PolicyWorks for your sponsorship of the event. It's great to be with these colleagues on the screen. And we are the only non-statewide organization in the group. So while we are appreciative of the opportunity, I think I just want to highlight that while we are just part of Central Iowa, we have 44 legislators in our footprint. We are 11 counties, 6,500 members, and many of you on the Zoom and the webinar today. It's up to you to continue to provide your feedback to each and every one of us. Most of you are members of at least one of our organizations, and we do our work because of what you bring to us. And so keep that feedback coming, just as the Business Record is asking of you. Make sure you're sharing with us how we can do our work up at the Capitol and ensure that we're growing a great DSM and statewide and beyond to the state of Iowa. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Brian?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Michael. I would like every lawmaker to ask themselves when they are drafting or proposing a piece of legislation, does this ensure that every Iowan sees an opportunity for themselves here in Iowa, whether you live here or to move here? Do you see an opportunity for yourself? If you look around the country, look, Iowa is not an exclusive club. People can live anywhere. So we need to be open and welcoming of all folks that can participate in this state and our economy.
Thank you, Brian. And Robert, round us out.
Well said from everybody. I think my final thought would be, cities are incredibly complex. They differ greatly across the state based on size, need, local conditions. They're engaged in providing services that impact all of our lives. So as we approach these policies, let's just make sure we take the time to understand how they'll function and try and think about that big holistic picture. It doesn't mean we can't make things better. It doesn't mean we can't do things differently. We just need to do it smartly rather than quickly and without kind of some of those broader complexities.
Well, thank you again. And thank you to all our panelists. If you get a chance, please in the chat, give them a big thank you for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. I want to thank you for attending the event as well and spending time learning more about what's on the docket for the upcoming legislative session. Our goal is always to provide information to you so that you've got the ability to do your business best. Hopefully today's event helped you do that. As a locally owned business, we are working hard to navigate the challenges that everybody is as it relates to workforce and the economy. The calendar may have flipped, and we continue to fight those issues right along with you. Our goal, as I've said before, is to help business do business better, and you can help us do that by ensuring we can continue to bring you these type of events, and of course the reporting in our products. Sponsorships and advertising make what we do possible. Not only does it help us, but more importantly, it helps you and your business. If you have a need to tell your company's story and to get your message out, please feel free to reach out our way. I want to thank again PolicyWorks today for helping sponsor today's event. We couldn't do this type of thing without you, so thank you for doing that. And of course, if you're not already a member, I'd of course encourage you to become a member of the Business Record so you can receive the weekly Business Record, of course, along with other events and opportunities. That concludes today's program. On behalf of the Business Record and our audience today, I want to give a final thank you to both our sponsors and of course to our panelists, Michael Crum for putting together a fantastic panel, and to you for being here today as well. Hope you have a great 2020.